At my wedding, my parents handed me a $240,000 invoice, calling it the cost of raising you. The entire reception went silent. I smiled, pulled out an envelope of my own, and said, "Funny, I have a bill for you too." "Hello, folks. My name is Olivia. I'm 29 years old, and on what was supposed to be the happiest day of my life, my parents stood in front of everyone I loved and handed me an invoice for $240,000. According to them, that was the price of being their daughter. If you'd met my parents before my wedding, you probably would have described them as hardworking people. They weren't abusive, they didn't scream, they didn't throw things. Instead, they had a habit of turning love into a transaction. Nothing they ever did for me came without a reminder. Every school supply, every birthday, every doctor's appointment, every meal, every opportunity. Sooner or later, I'd hear the same sentence. "Do you know how much we've spent on you?" When I was little, I thought all parents said things like that. As I grew older, I realized most parents didn't keep emotional receipts. Mine did. I also had an older brother, Jason. If my parents ever spent money helping him, they called it supporting family. When they spent money on me, it became another item added to an invisible debt I was apparently expected to repay one day. Jason received his first car for his 18th birthday. Dad proudly tossed him the keys and said, "Every young man deserves a good start." When I turned 18 and asked if I could borrow money for community college books, Dad smiled. "You'll appreciate them more if you buy them yourself." So I worked evenings at a grocery store while taking classes during the day. It was exhausting, but I managed. Eventually, I transferred to a university on scholarships and graduated with a degree in accounting. The day I received my diploma, Mom hugged me tightly, then whispered, "Now maybe all that money we spent raising you will finally be worth it." Most people would have heard encouragement. I heard another reminder that my life had always carried a price tag. Instead of arguing, I focused on building the kind of future I wanted. After graduation, I found a position with a financial consulting firm in Minneapolis. The hours were long, the work was demanding, but I loved solving problems, especially financial ones. Ironically, numbers made perfect sense at work. At home, they were always used to measure affection. 3 years later, I met Noah. He was an engineer with an easy smile and an incredible amount of patience. We met after accidentally reaching for the same book in a neighborhood bookstore. He stepped back immediately. "You first." I laughed. "I think you got there before I did." He smiled. "Then maybe we should both buy it." That one conversation turned into coffee. Coffee turned into dinner. Dinner somehow became forever. One of the first things Noah noticed about me was how often I apologized. If dinner took too long to cook, I'd apologize. If traffic made us late, I'd apologize. If someone else bumped into me, I'd apologize. One evening, he gently stopped me. "Olivia, has anyone ever told you that you don't have to earn your place in people's lives?" I looked at him for several seconds, then quietly answered, "No." He reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "Then let me be the first." 2 years later, he proposed during a quiet walk around a frozen lake just outside the city. There were no photographers, no audience, just snow falling softly around us. It was perfect. When we announced our engagement, my parents seemed thrilled, at least at first. Mom immediately started talking about invitations. Dad wanted to invite business associates I'd never met. Noah and I wanted a small ceremony with family and close friends. Eventually, we compromised. The guest list grew a little larger than we'd planned, but everyone seemed happy. Looking back, I wish I'd paid more attention to some of the comments my father kept making. "You'll finally understand how expensive life is." Or, "Marriage changes everything." Sometimes he'd laugh after saying things like that. Other times, he wouldn't. About 2 weeks before the wedding, Mom called. "I've been organizing old family paperwork." "That's nice. I found every receipt from when you were growing up." I laughed. "You kept receipts from 20 years ago?" "Of course." "Why?" "Oh," she paused. "You never know when they'll be useful." At the time, I thought she meant family memories. I couldn't have been more wrong. The wedding day arrived. It was everything Noah and I had hoped for. The ceremony overlooked a quiet lake, surrounded by pine trees. The weather was perfect. As I walked down the aisle toward the man I loved, nothing else mattered. Not work, not stress, not family expectations, just him. After the ceremony came the reception. People laughed, children danced. My grandmother cried through almost every speech. For a few beautiful hours, life felt exactly as it should. Then my father stood. He tapped his champagne glass with a spoon. I'd like everyone's attention. The room gradually became quiet. I smiled. I assumed he wanted to give a father of the bride speech. Instead, he reached inside his suit jacket and removed a thick white envelope. He walked directly toward me. "For you." I smiled politely. "A wedding letter. You could call it that." Several guests chuckled. I opened the envelope. Inside was a professionally printed document. Across the top, in large bold letters, "Invoice." My smile faded. I looked at the first page. Amount due, $240,481.36. My heart skipped. Underneath was another line. Description: the cost of raising Olivia from birth to marriage. The room became completely silent. I kept reading. Every expense had been listed: food, housing, medical care, school supplies, birthday parties, music lessons, clothing, even family vacations. Each item had a dollar amount beside it. At the bottom of the page, one final sentence: payment expected, now that you have begun your own family. I slowly looked up. Dad wasn't smiling anymore. He was serious. Completely serious. Mom folded her hands proudly. "As parents, we've invested a great deal in your future." Dad nodded. "We're not unreasonable. We don't expect the full amount today. We're willing to discuss monthly payments." A fork clattered onto someone's plate. Nobody laughed. Nobody spoke. I heard one of Noah's co-workers quietly whisper, "Is this actually happening?" Across the room, my brother Jason looked genuinely confused. He leaned toward our mother. "You didn't tell me you were doing this." She whispered back, "It'll teach her responsibility." Teach me responsibility. I'd worked since I was 16, paid my own way through college, never asked them for money after graduation. Still, somehow, they believed I owed them for existing. I looked toward Noah. He didn't speak. He simply searched my face, silently asking if I was okay. I took one slow breath, then another. Without saying a word, I reached beneath my chair. From my small wedding bag, I carefully removed a sealed manila envelope. I'd carried it with me all day, not because I'd expected to use it, because I'd promised myself years earlier that if my parents ever decided to turn our relationship into a financial transaction, I would answer them in the only language they seemed to understand. I placed the envelope gently on the table between us. Dad frowned. "What's that?" I met his eyes. A small smile crossed my face, and for the first time that afternoon, I wasn't the least bit nervous. Sometimes, the people who keep score their entire lives forget that someone else may have been keeping records too. As my parents stared at the envelope in front of them, they believed they were about to collect a debt. They had no idea they were about to face the cost of everything they'd spent years refusing to see. The reception hall was completely silent. My father looked down at the envelope, then back at me. "What exactly is this?" I gently pushed it toward him. "You asked me to settle a debt. I thought it was only fair that you looked at mine first." He frowned before opening it. Inside wasn't cash. It wasn't a check. It was a neatly organized binder. The first page read, "Financial contributions and family support record." Mom looked confused. "What is this supposed to mean?" I folded my hands. "It means that if we're turning our relationship into a business transaction, then every transaction deserves to be counted." Dad pulled out the first document. It wasn't emotional. It wasn't dramatic. It was simply a spreadsheet. Every page was supported by bank statements, receipts, canceled checks, and transfer confirmations. "I started keeping records when I was 19. I said quietly, "Not because I planned this, because I got tired of being told how much I supposedly owed." The first section listed every expense I'd paid for myself after becoming an adult: college tuition, textbooks, rent, car insurance, medical bills, my first apartment, every item my parents often claimed they'd covered. Next came another section. It documented every time I'd helped them financially. When Dad's business struggled 8 years earlier, I'd quietly transferred $12,000 to help cover payroll. When Mom needed surgery that insurance didn't fully cover, I paid the remaining balance. During the pandemic, I'd arranged weekly grocery deliveries for them for almost a year. When their water heater failed, I bought a replacement. When Dad's truck needed an expensive transmission repair, I covered the mechanic's bill because he was embarrassed to ask for help. Every payment had a date. Every date had proof. Then came the final page. Across the top, in bold letters, it read, "Total financial assistance provided to my parents since age 18, $214,863.54. Below it was one final line. Amount ever requested. In return, $0. Nobody in the room spoke, not even the servers moving between tables. Dad slowly flipped through the pages again. His hands had begun to shake. "You kept all of this?" I nodded. "I'm an accountant. I keep records. Someone near the back of the room quietly laughed, not because it was funny, because the irony was impossible to ignore. Mom finally found her voice. Olivia, we never asked you to keep score. I looked at her. No, you just spent my entire life reminding me that you did. She lowered her eyes. My brother Jason slowly stood up from his table. I need to say something. Everyone turned toward him. He looked at our parents. Did you give me an invoice too? Dad looked uncomfortable. No, why not? Neither of them answered. Jason continued. You helped me with my first car. You paid for my master's degree. When my restaurant failed, you let me move back home for nearly a year. He swallowed hard. You never once talked about charging me. Then he looked at me. But Olivia, you've been paying your own way since high school. His voice cracked, and somehow she's the one who owes you money. Mom wiped away a tear. We never meant it like that. No, Jason replied. Then how exactly did you mean it? Silence. The entire room waited. Finally, Dad spoke. We sacrificed a lot. I nodded. I know. And I'm grateful. I've thanked you more times than I can count. But becoming parents was your decision. It wasn't mine. Another silence settled over the room. I continued speaking calmly. You chose to feed me. You chose to educate me. You chose to buy birthday presents. Those weren't loans. They were responsibilities. My grandmother quietly stood from her chair. She'd remained silent all evening. She slowly walked toward my parents, then looked directly at my father. Your mother and I struggled to raise 4 children. She paused. We never once considered sending any of you a bill. Dad couldn't look at her. She gently placed her hand on his shoulder. Love isn't something children purchase from their parents. It's something parents choose to give. For the first time that evening, my father looked genuinely ashamed. He reached for the invoice he'd handed me. He stared at it for several seconds, then slowly tore it in half, then into quarters, then smaller still, until it was nothing more than scraps of paper scattered across the table. He looked at me. I'm sorry, not defensive, not proud, just sorry. Mom started crying openly. We honestly thought. She stopped. I waited. We thought this would make you understand everything we'd done for you. I smiled sadly. I understood. I always understood. The problem was, you never understood what I'd been doing for you. Dad closed the binder. I don't know how we became people who thought this was acceptable. Neither did I. But for the first time, he was asking himself the question, instead of expecting me to answer it. Noah quietly stood beside me. He slipped his hand into mine. Without saying a word, he reminded me that I wasn't standing alone anymore. Dad looked toward him. I owe you an apology too. Noah shook his head gently. You don't owe me one. You owe your daughter the kind of love that never comes with conditions. Those words seemed to break something inside my father. He nodded once. I know. The DJ, who had stopped the music the moment everything began, looked toward us uncertainly. I smiled. It's okay. We're ready. He restarted the music. Noah looked at me. May I have this dance? I laughed through my tears. I was wondering if you'd ever ask. As we stepped onto the dance floor, the guests slowly began clapping, not because anyone had won, because something painful had finally been spoken out loud. Epilogue. Soft piano becomes lighter, carrying the feeling of healing that only comes after honesty. It's been almost 2 years since our wedding. The binder still sits in a drawer at home, not because I ever plan to use it again, but because it reminds me of the day I finally stopped believing I had to apologize for existing. My parents asked us to attend family counseling a few months after the wedding. It wasn't easy. There were uncomfortable conversations, long silences, and difficult truths, but slowly, things began to change. Dad stopped measuring love in dollars. Mom stopped comparing her children. For the first time in my life, family dinners felt like conversations instead of negotiations. Jason and I became closer than we'd ever been. One afternoon, he admitted, I always knew they treated us differently. I just never realized how much it hurt you. Hearing that meant more than he probably realized. My thoughts. Looking back, I don't think the invoice was the worst part of that day. The worst part was realizing my parents genuinely believed that raising their child created a debt. Children don't sign contracts before they're born. They don't ask to exist. Parents choose that responsibility because they love them, or at least they should. I'm grateful for everything my parents did to give me a good life. But gratitude and debt are not the same thing. Love given with the expectation of repayment isn't really a gift. It's a transaction.